Mr. Luis Garicano is the question of how can we improve obliged entities' ability to detect criminal activity. It is rather clear today that extensive efforts by the private sector, despite these efforts, most criminal assets seem somehow to penetrate the financial system. So we have, not least from the side of Europol, estimates that point to, in the end, a very small percentage of criminal assets only being detected and in the end confiscated. So the question arises then, whether this should really come as a surprise, given that not least the volume of EU's external trade and the volume of foreign investment in the EU. We have just basically commercial transactions of a size which allow criminal assets to be relatively easily hidden in the shuffle of legitimate transactions. And given the difficulties we face there, in particular also that there is a need to, I guess, which is shared by most, to keep markets open and not to create disproportionate burdens for economic activity, might there be not a case to be made for saying that the AML system, of which we are now working for about 30 years, has somehow overestimated the ability of obliged entities to detect criminal activity, and on the other side neglected the role and also, frankly, the resources of competent authorities in helping the private sector's preventive efforts. So that leads us basically to the topic which was often, or at least a couple of times already alluded to this afternoon, the question of public-private partnerships, and to which extent we can or should move to a system where we are much more in a dialogue-based vision of customer due diligence, where there is not only a better feedback culture from financial intelligence units to reporting entities, but potentially a much more regular information stream from the FIUs in particular to competent authority, to the reporting entities, to tell them when to perform enhanced CDD, and therefore to, in the end, lead to a system in which we have not only typologies from time to time shared, but something more interactive. Do you think that is an option, or would it be asked too much from competent authorities, FIUs, and supervisors? Your opinion, Mr. Garicano.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks to the Commission for organizing this, and I'm really happy to be able to participate. The first thing that I want to say to your question, and more broadly, is that I would hope that the Commission, in making its proposals, first of all, of course, we like that they have the action plan and making a legislative proposal, that it acts with confidence. I think that with the best example is the GDPR, that shows that Europe can be a regulatory leader worldwide. And many countries will complain and squeal and say we can't comply, but at the end of the day, access to a market of 400 million customers is actually something that everybody wants. And Facebook has been saying, oh, we'll close our operations in Europe. Well, I say, ha, 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 that threat is not credible. And many people will say we can't comply with the new rules on AML. We will just have to say, well, fine, you know. And the reason I'm pointing out this is because indeed I think the current system is not fit for purpose. We've been working for many decades, and most financial crime remains by far undetected. And I think there are two things that we can do to, in your words, to help the detection, to help financial companies detect, to help everybody detect. And both have to do with the public sector. I don't think it's a question of dialogue. I think the question of very sharp action. The first one is one that we have been all engaged in and discussing since the AML directive, which is the beneficial ownership issue. Beneficial ownership registries are not working. Most countries should have put one in place. And the truth of the matter is they aren't really working. In most cases, they're not open, or they have lots of obstacles to be accessed, or like in the UK is one which is open and which can be accessed. Then companies put a beneficial owner with a tax haven address, or they claim to have no beneficial owner. I mean, the beneficial ownership registers is the key component here. If we have kind of opaque Panama-based companies that are shuffling money around, we're never going to know if it's legitimate or illegitimate transaction they're engaged in. So one possibility would be to do like the US, which lowered the thresholds. I don't think that's enough. I think from the perspective of regulatory kind of superpower that we are, we should go further and we should just say, look, I mean, we need to know who everybody who makes a transaction here is and who it is benefiting. And if we don't know it, the transaction is not going to be allowed. I mean, I think that's, Delaware, etc., going to squeal. Well, fine, the company can move its operations to Texas. And if that's not possible, then they shouldn't do business with the European Union. The second has to do with Brexit. Brexit is a gigantic opportunity. Brexit means some of the biggest tax havens, which are not the UK itself, but all the crown dependencies and all the other kind of weird set of half-depending areas. Now they are not the European Union. And now we can act in a firm and serious way. And I think we need to be very demanding to ensure that we use this opportunity properly. Of course, then in shifting towards a stronger public sector and public sector enforcement, I would say, of course, and everybody has been talking about it in these panels, the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, needs to be very, very, take a leading job. And we need to create it, we need to give it tools together with the public prosecutor, etc. And I want to close by saying GDPR, okay? GDPR was an example that we could act and we could impose the standards. Then at the end, we left a hole because the people can go to the Irish supervisor and that's bad. And there's a hole to the GDPR. But it just shows that Europe can act even in the face of strong opposition by other countries.
Thank you. Just to make sure that I understood you correctly, when you say we should instead focus, instead of a more dialogue-based system, we should focus more on a strict enforcement of rules, in particular as regards the already existing prohibition, not to continue a business relationship, not to perform transactions if you cannot identify in a reliable way the beneficial owner or, in the case of enhanced CDD, the source of the assets in question. Are you not concerned in this case that in the end we are in a system then where we still have to overcome the challenge that, yes, I mean, you might ask certain companies to either do this or leave the European Union and not perform any business here anymore. But is this really, in the end, a preferable approach and a realistic approach when, in the end, AML is, of course, one consideration, but it's not the only consideration. There's, of course, in particular, strong interest to keep markets open. So might it then be not, at least from your point of view, a second best option to say, I mean, we might at least require more reporting, as you say, lowering the threshold maybe, but at least say, if to the extent that it is not viable just to say you either show us everything, you show us who the beneficial owner of your customers are, which is often not really possible, or you abandon Europe, it might be a better approach to say we move towards a system where, in particular, obliged entities might, before they even finish the customer due diligence, come to the FIU and say, we had this person a couple of times, we always looked into it carefully, we didn't find anything, but we also couldn't establish a beneficial owner in a most reliable way, which we have information, but maybe not enough information. So for the FIU to give a green light to such a transaction, would such a model for you work? So that would probably go much further than just the current feedback obligations, but would...
Oh.
Yeah, what do you think that could be envisaged as a model? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would say you said, well, the obligations of beneficial ownership exists. My sense, my information might be wrong or out of date, and maybe the Commission can clarify us on that, is that 17 of the 27 member states do not have a centralized register of beneficial owners of companies, which is available to the public. So it's literally impossible for the parties in the transaction to just go there, check who are they dealing with. So even the financial obligation to say, well, it already exists, is not really there. Second, to your point, well, we're going to not keep markets open. We're going to. I don't really buy it. I don't think if we are strict on this, we are honestly we have to be confident of our ability. That's my main message for now. I just don't think anybody seriously is not going to deal with Europe, is not going to invest, is not going to move money because they need to reveal. Every significant actor that we care about is going to say, well, we really hate it, but we move our headquarters from Delaware to New York, and we actually comply with all these obligations. So I trust, like in GDPR, I trust that this trade-off that you're pointing out is not really that constraining. There is always something that we're going to lose, but we're going to gain insight into a wide range of crimes which are now hidden away, as we have seen in the FinCEN scandals. I was said in the Panama Papers and all the rest, the Fonseca. So you say, well, reporting, enhanced reporting, and everything. The problem with the reporting has been very, very, very well clarified by this FinCEN scandal, right? The SARs basically flagged trillions. 2 trillion transactions were flagged by these SARs in this scandal. So basically, the companies flag anything. They report a lot. It's not like they're reporting little. They report a lot, to the point where they overwhelm the ability of the system to detect. If we say, look, we want to know the beneficial owner, your responsibility is to know the beneficial owner, and you're going to be in trouble if you deal with somebody who you don't know the beneficial owner is. We can actually reduce rather than increase the reporting, because we are basically saying, look, you're not really allowed to transact with people that you actually do not know who they are. And I think that's the path that we need to take. We need to take much more transparency in these obligations, and much more reliance on strong sanctions by the FIU and by the new European supervisor, which I am really convinced that the European Commission is going to propose. We now have a system that is not really allowing the EU supervisor to have, or any supervisor, to have any amount of resources. It's not like, if we gave them more resources, they could process 2 trillion transactions. I don't think they're ever going to be able to process 2 trillion transactions, whatever resources